The next slot, Deputy Mick, you propose to share with Deputy Brid Smith.
Thank you, Count Corla. Count Corla, an incredible speech from the Minister. I'll quote from it here. Unfortunately, this bill tries to legislate for the whole of the economy in order to address one dispute in a particular sector. Minister, if you think that the type of precarious work that this bill seeks to address applies to just done stores or to the retail trade, you are seriously out of touch with what is going on in hundreds and thousands of workplaces across this country. I also note, Ceann Comhairle, the use by the Minister of Brexit as an argument to justify the denial and the delay of workers' rights. In this regard, I believe that the Fine Gael party are acting in reality for the employers. Now, on the bill, the AATDs will support the progress of this bill and will engage in committee stage, if it gets there, with amendments. The issue for us is making it as effective as possible a remedy to combat precarity in the workplace in general, but particularly to weaken the power of employers and management to use the uncertainty and insecurity of hours as a control mechanism. If the bill was implemented in its current form, some headway would be made. But we also have to anticipate how employers and management will inevitably try to work around it to maintain the status quo. Specifically, the bill provides for a mechanism for somebody who worked 6 consecutive months on hours greater than the hours they were originally contracted for to apply to have those increased hours made permanent, thus positively amending their contract. In the context of a small to medium-sized employment and/or in the context of a workplace where the employee who stands to benefit have special skill sets, this legislation, as it is currently framed, could be a real assist. However, we know from representations from Mandate and the Irish Congress of Trade Unions that a motivator behind this legislation is the conduct of large retail chains like Dunnes Stores, and it's how this proposed legislation could be subverted by employers like Dunnes that should preoccupy us at committee stage. For example, in the context of a large unskilled or semi-skilled workforce with a tradition of turnover, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the likes of Dunnes could engineer that staff never work 6 consecutive months on hours greater than what is in their contract. You could have a constant churn of staff on the eve of the 6th month being put on reduced hours, and those additional hours that they worked in the previous 5 and a bit months being given to newer members of staff. So, amendments to the effect that seniority or length of service count for the allocation of hours, and that new hires cannot become a mechanism to undermine the spirit of this bill, will need to be considered. The framing of the bill in Section 3 is such that it entertains only individual applications for increased banded hours. I think the exercising of any workers' rights is done best when it is done collectively, and I would suggest that section be appropriately reworded to allow for collective applications where you have groups of workers simultaneously achieving the threshold where they can apply for an approved work band. I think some further elaboration in the bill needs to be considered at committee stage on the issue of penalties for recalcitrant employers. My understanding of the bill as is currently drafted is that the maximum favourable ruling a worker could get at the WRC is in order to the employer to increase the band. However, the issue of compensation for lost pay if a worker suffered a loss of hours subsequent to working the 6 consecutive months should also be considered. In conclusion, we will not be supporting the Fianna Fáil amendment. The amendment seeks, in our view, to walk a tightrope between the right of workers and employers at a time when it is necessary to make a bold stand in support of workers' rights. The amendment would also serve to delay action on workers' rights at a time when workers in precarious employment have already waited far too long for some measure of justice.
Okay, Deputy Smith, you have 3.5 minutes.
Do I get to speak now? Yeah, grand. You were looking that way, I thought.
No, sorry.
Calling somebody else up called Smith over that way. We want to welcome the bill and support it as a first step towards addressing the imbalance in the worker-employer rights. and we'd like to note Unite's recent report on low wages and precarious work, and Mandate Union's report that found 17% of people who live below the poverty line work in precarious jobs with so-called zero-hour contracts. We had this discussion earlier in topical issues on the question of the Social Justice Ireland report today. The top 1% have seen their wealth and influence grow massively, and the flip side to what has happened there is that thousands of workers who are left without secure pensionable jobs with a living wage. Many in this House would argue against the rights of workers to secure a pensionable job as being uncompetitive, as being jeopardised to the risk of the growth of the economy. The myth that flexible contracts are both for the employer and the employee, where they enter into agreement freely, is really not in the interests of both. Reality is very different. The benefit is overwhelmingly for the employer. Workers can't refuse the contracts for fear that if they turn them down, it will result in them being victimised and having work withdrawn from them. So we're back to the days when Larkin had to organise dockers against a system where foremen could pick and choose the dockers they wanted and the hours they wanted. Now, the University of Limerick report by Esther Lynch has been referred to a number of times, but it is hard, and she acknowledges this in the report, to find figures for Ireland, but the reports that have been done recently for Britain strongly suggest that most people on these contracts are women, are young, or are over 65 years of age. And it also interestingly finds that those guilty of using these type of contracts are not the SMEs and the smaller businesses, but actually the multinationals and the very, very big employers. Those in the likes of Domino's Pizzas, Dunnes Stores, Deliveroo, call centres, contract cleaners, very, very big employers are using these type of contracts. But the ones I want to observe my last comments for, I've lots more to say, I won't get time for, is Fianna Fáil. I just cannot get over the suspenders that make up the Fianna Fáil party, and I made a list of the things that they have suspended in the last couple of weeks: water, bins, repeal the 8th, the NAM investigation, education, equality, and now bandit hours. And I'm probably leaving a couple out, and there's probably more to come. So I think that the attempt by Fianna Fáil to suspend this for a discussion for a year is actually quite disgusting, while at the same time pretending that they give a damn about workers' rights. We want to welcome this bill. Well, we'd like to see it go past committee stage so we could put in some amendments. One, for example, that force employers to pay proper overtime rates, that a minimum period for a worker that can be called into work on such contracts is limited to 4 hours, that the length of time a worker can be put on such contract is limited, and that the proportion of a workforce that can be put on such contracts is limited. Ultimately, we believe the greatest measure to stop this abuse is trade union organisation and the free and legal right for unions to organise in workplaces, to enter workplaces and to speak directly and organise directly their members. That's what will really undermine these type of contracts, not the scare tactics of the type of employer we have to endure, or the obfuscation of Fianna Fáil.
Thank you very much,
I think
Deputy
it's disgraceful.
Our next